Attention, school-based dyslexia educators.
Are you tired of juggling prep work and paper materials?
Amplio Reading Intervention is here to give you more time for what matters most, your students.
Amplio offers fully digitized versions of the renowned MTA and Esperanza curricula, making it easier than ever to deliver structured literacy intervention and track progress in real time, all while staying aligned with Texas Dyslexia Handbook standards.
Come join countless districts who are simplifying their dyslexia interventions with Amplio.
Learn more at ampliolearning.com. That's AMPLIO learning.com. Because empowering students starts with empowering educators.
Hi, this is Amy
And Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTS, Certified Academic Language Therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called The Dyslexia Duo.
So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us! Thank you for rejoining us as we continue talking with education author on literacy and equity, Natalie Wexler. So, along with that, vocabulary is big, right? So, I can remember growing up, my mom was a teacher. So, I can remember growing up, my mom always used what we call the 50-cent words with us. I mean, in just her everyday language. And so, I tried to pass that on to my own children. I tried to do that with my students. How can vocabulary help a student with their comprehension, their reading comprehension, their listening comprehension?
Well, it's crucial. I mean, I think it's obvious, even as adults, if we're reading something that has a lot of vocabulary that we don't understand, people say, oh, you could just Google it. Well, that, as I mentioned, is a heavy burden on working memory. Sometimes in my presentations, I show a paragraph about cricket, describing a cricket match. It's just one paragraph, and it's totally incomprehensible if you're not a cricket fan, because it uses all of these terms. And at somebody's suggestion, I once tried to Google all of the terms in that paragraph that I did not understand. And that took me easily 45 minutes. And I still didn't understand the paragraph because I didn't understand the definitions. I didn't, have that critical mass of background knowledge about cricket. But I think the important thing is to realize that vocabulary and background knowledge are not separate. I mean, vocabulary is the tip of an iceberg of knowledge. You really can't be said to understand a word like medieval. Maybe you memorize a definition, but if you don't know anything about history, you don't really understand the word medieval. And if you don't understand it, you're probably not going to remember it. In order for things to stick around in long-term memory, you have to be able to attach meaning to them. So the best way to expand vocabulary is through expanding knowledge. And the other reason I would say that is we know that kids need, in order to become proficient readers, they need to acquire far more words than we can teach them directly. Most of the words that they acquire, they will acquire by making inferences because these words show up near other words they already know. That is more likely to happen if you are building knowledge coherently. So if you're learning about great cats and they know lion and tiger, and then they see the word lynx in proximity to those other words they know, even if you don't teach them explicitly the word lynx, they'll figure it out because they're going to see it in that context, hopefully more than once.
You made me think about, because I have to do assessments when I look at a student that could be dyslexic, and one of the assessments has a listening comprehension piece, and it talks about cricket and baseball. And the students, the students have to listen to it. And the listening comprehension talks about this is what cricket is and this is what base, and these are little kids listening to this. And so now list one difference between cricket and baseball. And I tell you, every single time the little kids go, well, crickets can't play baseball. Every single time. Every single time. I just did one this week and I was like, yeah, that's pretty much what I hear every time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great illustration of, lack of background knowledge.
Yeah.
If you don't understand that cricket is also the name of a sport.
Yeah, every time. So when I was growing up, we always had we had weekly spelling tests and we had weekly vocabulary tests. It's private school. And so we had to take a vocabulary test every week, and it was a little taxing. I think I brought with me into my adulthood just a few of those words, but I don't remember anything else. But how can we support vocabulary development beyond just mere memorization of here's the term, here's the definition, here's the term, here's the definition?
Well, as I said, I mean, I don't think lists of sort of, disconnected vocabulary words are going to be particularly effective. Yeah. But I would focus on vocabulary words that are related to texts that the class is reading, to the topics. And, there's the tier system of vocabulary words. Tier 1, you don't want to spend much time on. Those are words kids are going to just pick up. But tier 2 are those vocabulary words that are more academic, but will also be found in a number of contexts. And so that's kind of the sweet spot. You want to teach them within the context where they appear, but then when kids understand them, they will likely see them in other contexts and understand them. And then those tier 3 words are ones that are pretty specialized, and you may want to teach some of those directly if they're important for kids to understand whatever they're being expected to read. So you do want to teach some vocabulary words directly. Just don't expect that A, you can do that in isolation from a larger context, and B, that's going to take care of all the vocabulary words they need to know. And the other thing I would mention is, and this can start even at younger grade levels, but the role of morphology, prefixes, suffixes, roots, so bringing in etymology and, even Greek and Latin roots, that can help these vocabulary words stick in memory and also enable kids to figure out an unfamiliar word. If they know the word, I mean, I had a 10th grader that I was trying to tutor in writing years ago, and I gave him a sentence that included the word admirable. And I remember, he didn't want to admit this, but he finally, after looking at the sentence for a long time, he said, I don't know what admirable means. And I said, I mean, it was very hard to predict, but sometimes they knew things and sometimes they didn't. It was just really hard to predict. And I said, well, you know what the word admire means? And he says, yes. But he didn't know about that suffix, yeah. ABLE. If he'd known that, he probably could have figured out the word admirable.
That's interesting. It made me think about a student, and I was working with a young child. And sometimes you forget to review some things about vocabulary because you think, oh, they'll know this. And this was a little boy. I was reading the book Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type with him. He's 7. And so the cows are typing. And so I didn't think to go over what a typewriter was. He's 7 years old. And when we finished the book and he's laughing and we're going over the vocabulary and he points to a picture, he goes, what's that? I said, that's a typewriter. I said, that's what they're typing on. He goes, what is that? I was like, oh, I totally did a disservice for that whole book.
I think that is one of the most challenging things about teaching is to figure out what do kids already know. Mm-hmm. And cognitive science tells us that what you already know is the most important factor in what you can learn next. So it is really crucial to know what kids already know. This is one reason that a coherent knowledge building curriculum is so helpful, because you can kind of depend on them knowing what they've learned in prior years. But I saw a great example of this. We assume kids know things. I mean, it's not our fault. I think we all do this, but you never know. But somebody left a comment on one of my posts about he was a veteran teacher who had been observing a class being taught by a novice teacher. I think it was an ethnic studies class. And these were, I think, 11th graders. And the assignment was to give a presentation about whether an elementary school in the district should retain the name Thomas Jefferson. And the observer said, the presentations were going smoothly. Kids seemed to be able to do it. But he noticed that they were all kind of similar and kind of superficial, and he thought maybe they were just repeating what the teacher had said. And then a few days later, he happened to be talking to one of the students in the class and discovered that the student, what he called an apparently normal 11th grader, did not know who Thomas Jefferson was. Oh. So you can't really do that assignment well if you don't know who Thomas Jefferson was.
Oh my goodness, it's that background knowledge playing right again. I mean, and
that is not that unusual. We have done a terrible job of building knowledge of history and geography starting in the lower grades. And that is a large part of the explanation for why kids at higher grade levels don't know things like who was Thomas Jefferson.
That's perfect.
So I kind of wanted to piggyback on a few things that you guys were discussing.
Sorry.
Dr. Kelly was our episode 3 guest. She was Dr. Kelly Sandman Hurley, and she did talk a lot about how it's so important to introduce the morphology like you were talking about. And she had talked about introducing it as early as you can, as early as possible. I went to a continuing education that said 4th and 5th grade. So all along I had thought, oh, okay, that's the sweet spot age. She said, no, we can start introducing it earlier. You can start with even adding an S at the end makes the word pluralize. That means more than one, so that was a really eye-opening thing to me. Dr. Nancy Mather had talked about how a normal average student would need to have 4 to 5 repetitions to acquire a new word for reading. And I wonder if the same repetitions are needed to acquire vocabulary words, first of all. And then second of all, is that different for a dyslexic reader, just like it would be different for a dyslexic reader to acquire words to be able to read them?
I don't really know about the difference for dyslexics. I think any learning, repeated exposure, repeated engagement with material is crucial. And I just have come across a couple of studies fairly recently finding that, and I think this is definitely counterintuitive, but that all learners, and I don't know if that includes dyslexic learners, but learn basically at the same rate. And one study found that they were using different sort of chunks of knowledge, but one study found that all learners need seven different sort of engagements or learning opportunities with the same concept in order to retain it. The other one said 3 opportunities. I don't think there's necessarily a magic number, and I think it's going to depend on the concept. Some concepts are more complex than others. I think what we need to take away from this is that repeated exposure, and not just exposure, but engagement, is really important. And what cognitive science tells us is, there's something called retrieval practice. So the more you practice retrieving an item of information that you have in long-term memory, but maybe you've slightly forgotten, the easier it's going to be to retrieve that item in the future. So that, again, argues for some repetition. And then in addition to that, it helps to space out that retrieval practice. It helps to vary like if you're doing math problems, don't just do, all dividing fractions and then all, multiplying. Just mix it up, because actually what that does is it makes it more challenging. You don't want to make it too challenging, but you want some effort to be involved, because there's no learning without effort. So I think it's not just a question of straight repetition. Okay. You want to vary things, but you want kids to be retrieving that same item, that same kind of knowledge repeatedly to ensure that they're really going to be able to retrieve it in the future. And you want time to pass. So it's not like you're going to give them 4 exposures, 4 engagements in the course of 20 minutes, because they need time to consolidate the learning in between those exposures.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think too, the layering process helps a lot with the acquisition.
When I'm teaching teachers, we talk about writing. It's typically towards the end of our training. We don't go as deep as I'd like to, but I know grammar is significant, understanding the parts of speech. But what is the importance of writing? I know it supports reading, but what is the importance of writing?
Well, I wish we had more research, good research that had been done on writing. There's not nearly as much on writing as there is on reading. But what we do have, and what we can extrapolate from research in cognitive science generally, is that writing, it is not just a crucial skill in and of itself, but it is, as I mentioned before, as with reading, it's a way of learning, a way of deepening our knowledge. It is also reflective of everything we've been able to learn. So as with reading, we really shouldn't think of it as something separate from learning in general, and certainly not separate from reading. So one thing that writing can do is to boost reading comprehension by familiarizing students with that complex sentence structure, syntax of written language. Reading aloud can help with that, but even more powerful is to teach kids explicitly how to do something like use a subordinating conjunction. If they know how to do that in their own writing, they're going to be in a much better position to understand that kind of construction when they come across it in their reading.
Right.
Writing also, we have evidence that when kids write about what they're learning, as I mentioned, it really boosts their learning. And when we write, we are doing, ideally, if we're writing well, all of those things that we try to get at through teaching those reading comprehension skills. If you can construct a good topic sentence for a paragraph, you have learned in a very powerful way how to find the main idea. And then if you can write the rest of the paragraph, you've learned how to bring in supporting details. We're constantly, when we're writing, we're having to make inferences, we're having to connect claims to evidence, all of those things. And summarizing, there is also a lot of research behind that. And the best way to do all of those things is through manageable writing assignments. I mean, if you tell kids to go off and practice the skill of summarizing while they're reading their leveled books, how do you know that they're really practicing that, or whatever the skill is? But when you ask them to write, you have insight into what's actually going on in their minds. Do they understand this material? Are they able to summarize it, or whatever? The catch here with writing is it's really hard. It imposes a tremendous cognitive load, more than reading, especially if you're an inexperienced writer, but even if you're an experienced writer, it's still, it's not easy. And so we can't just ask kids to just write, write a paragraph, write an essay, and expect them to just do it. Most kids are going to need much more explicit instruction than that. And it really needs to start for most kids at the sentence level. And that's partly to make the cognitive load more manageable, but it's also, because writing is hard, writing at length only makes it harder. But it also really helps to teach that syntax, that sentence structure. And it can be a powerful way, even at the sentence level, of reinforcing and deepening content knowledge. So it's really important to embed writing activities as much as possible in the content of the curriculum. So we're using it to enable kids to understand and retain the information we want them to retain.
Because you talked about starting with a good sentence. What age would you start the writing process?
Well, and I'm drawing on the Writing Revolution method, which is, I'm the co-author of that book, but I'm not the creator of the method. My co-author, Judith Hochman, is a veteran educator who created the method over many years of really trial and error. And it's also the name of a nonprofit in New York that offers training in the method. And the book is actually geared to grades 3 and up, I would say. Someday I hope we have a book that really focuses on K through 2. But there is a course that the organization offers focused on K through 2. But I'll tell you, having some familiarity with what can be done at K through 2, you really, at that, as with reading comprehension and building that background knowledge, you want to do a lot of this orally in the early grades so that kids are not cognitively overwhelmed. And if they're still learning how to form letters and dealing with spelling, and we have a real problem in this country that all these state writing standards ask even kindergartners and first graders to write at length. Mm-hmm. And that is actually leaving a lot of learning on the table because, and I've seen this in kindergarten classrooms, they're so overwhelmed by just trying to get letters, on paper and words on paper that they may have something to say, but they can't get it out. And in the process, they're losing a lot of potential learning. There's a lot that you can do orally. For example, one of the many sentence level activities that's part of the Writing Revolution is one called Because, But, and So. And that consists of giving students a sentence stem. Once they've got the idea of what those conjunctions mean, you want to introduce these new concepts with familiar material, again, so you don't cognitively overload kids. But once they got the idea of it, you could give them a sentence stem embedded in material that they've learned something about, and then they have to complete the stem with each of those conjunctions, or maybe two of those conjunctions, because, but. So, for example, if you're teaching kindergarteners about sound waves, the teacher could say, you can't see sound waves, but, and then the kids could respond, but you can hear them. Or you can't see sound waves because they're invisible. And the teacher might write those things on the board, but the students aren't actually writing them. But eventually they will be able to use those conjunctions. They will be familiar with them because they've encountered them, as part of their oral language experience. And teachers of K through 2 who have used this method tell me that it really carries over to their oral language, their oral speech as well. They start speaking in complete sentences. They start, completing other people's sentences with because or but. And you could do that with simple outlines, simple subordinating conjunctions like before, after, when. And it really, I had the opportunity to visit a district in Louisiana that was using the Writing Revolution method combined with a content-rich curriculum in a very, high poverty district. And it was extraordinary what I saw, what teachers were telling me about what kids were now able to do, which they had not been able to do before. But this combination can really work wonders.
Wow. So we need to get districts on board and start doing with the content rich and some more writing activities, even from 2.0. And start doing that more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping, this was a district, they didn't just read the book. Every teacher in that district has been trained by the Writing Revolution organization. So that makes a big difference. Right. But the reason I visited that district is I have a book coming out in, I hope, January called Beyond the Science of Reading, Connecting Literacy Instruction to the Science of Learning. Oh. And I wanted to find a district that was doing, all of this stuff that was using both a content-rich curriculum and a method like the Writing Revolution. And I really think it's a lot to ask teachers to read all about the science of learning and then apply that to what they're doing in the classroom. It's like they've got a lot to juggle. But many teachers are aware that they need help with writing instruction and that their kids need help. So it is a good way in. You want to improve your kids' writing? Here's a method. But this method, when implemented well, actually also provides all of the benefits of instruction that's aligned with a principle supported by cognitive science. You can use it for retrieval practice and space practice, and it also, and you can use it for what cognitive scientists call elaboration, which is getting kids just to ask and answer questions and think about what they're learning. It is tremendously powerful when it's done in a way that is not cognitively overwhelming.
Wow. I have so many questions, and because my working memory is a little taxed.
Well, we all have working memory issues,
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
Hi, this is Melissa with Kids First Dyslexia Services. I am excited to share with you my private practice. Kids First Dyslexia Services is a private practice that specializes in dyslexia therapy. Each one-on-one session focuses on instruction specific to your child's needs in a nurturing environment that develops self-esteem, builds confidence, and fosters a sense of accomplishment, resulting in happier kids with higher levels of achievement. We provide a professional, personalized experience, always putting the child first. We value the relationships with both our students and parents, because strengthening skills and overcoming hurdles to achieve desired goals and success is a team effort. For more information, please visit www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com. That is www.kidsfirstdyslexia.com.
Hi there. This is Amy Rodenroth, owner of Discovery Dyslexia Services. So tell me if any of these situations are familiar to you. Your dyslexia teacher/therapist has suddenly retired unexpectedly, and you do not have the personnel to fill the space. Or you do not have enough trained teachers or therapists for the number of students who have qualified for dyslexia services, and you need a trained teacher or therapist quickly, like yesterday quickly. Or you need a teacher to provide compensatory services and you do not have anyone that can provide what's needed. Well, what do you do? I'm going to tell you what you can do. You can call Discovery Dyslexia Services. Discovery Dyslexia Services can help you with your various dyslexia concerns. We have multiple CALTs who can provide virtual small group therapy. We can also train your teachers in most dyslexia curricula, either virtually or on site. Just let us know how we can help support you. For more information, go to our website at www.discoveread.com. Let me spell that for you. DYSCOVEREAD.com. I don't know, it's a funny name, but we're providing huge services for our dyslexic population. So keep in mind, Discovery Dyslexia Services, covering all your dyslexia needs. Let's return to the show.
So I had a question that popped up. Do you agree with the use of vocabulary banks as part of this instruction, this writing instruction, where you had mentioned using these transitionary words like because, but, and so to help build that writing muscle? Do you agree also with a vocabulary bank where they could maybe look at these words that are the key words of the instruction and they can use those vocabulary words as part of their writing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that would apply to words like because, but, and so, or, although. So part of the writing revolution is to have posters displayed in the classroom that lists those words so kids can refer to them. But the second grade classroom that I spent time in that was using a knowledge building curriculum, they had charts on the wall that were like anchor charts, but they were created during and after every read aloud by the students and the teachers collaboratively. And they had the key vocabulary words from each read aloud listed there that students could refer to when they were writing something or in class discussion. The teacher would say, we have our anchor chart here. Do you see the word that you're looking for? This is another thing about writing. So there's something in cognitive science that I learned of recently called the transient information effect. And what that means is it's really hard to just remember stuff, but if you have it written down and you can just look at it, then you don't have to juggle it in working memory. And that opens up more space in working memory for things like analysis. So this is one reason it's a good idea to use writing as a basis for class discussion, but also a vocabulary bank is right there. You don't have to hold all these words in working memory. You've offloaded some of that burden to something concrete that you can refer to.
Okay, that sounds good. And then how else can we support students in their writing? For example, one of the ways I help my parents give them tips is using the audio equipment on their iPads or something of that nature where the student can speak what they want to write into an audio device so that just frees up that working memory like you were talking about and get their thoughts out. Do you recommend something like that? And or when do you bridge the gap into getting out of that?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not that familiar with that technology specifically and whether it's been studied, but I would say generally that talking is helping to lay the groundwork for writing, brainstorming, so the class has read a text, then maybe a pre-writing activity could be brainstorming. Let's say the teacher, maybe kids aren't yet at the stage where they're creating topic sentences, but you want them to learn about that and how to relate details to a topic sentence. So you could have them brainstorm. The teacher could put a topic sentence on the board, and then the kids could brainstorm details. And then you want to sort of guide kids through this before you expect them to do it independently. Which of these details, let's pick 3 or 4 that are most related and most important to the topic sentence. And then that becomes a basis for writing. And then the writing can in turn become a basis for discussion. So it's really a two-way thing. The key thing to bear in mind is that, as I mentioned before, conversational language is really different from written language. Written language is almost like a second language. So it's not just talking that's going to equip you to write. You do have to explicitly learn how to, use transition words and phrases that we wouldn't necessarily use in conversation, or words like moreover, that you're going to encounter in reading, and you may not understand them. But there is definitely a two-way relationship. I've been reading about something called oracy, which is a concept that's becoming very popular in England. And that just means speaking. But the point being that we speak in different registers, right? And you could be a fine conversationalist, but you might not do a great job with a presentation or a job interview, where we might want to speak in complete sentences and have a more formal register. Once you learn how to write, it's not that you're necessarily going to speak exactly the way you would write a term paper, but it does carry over into enabling you to adopt that more formal speaking register when it's appropriate. And that opens up all sorts of life possibilities as well. I mean, if you do better in a job interview, et cetera.
So I think anybody seeking a job should practice maybe some writing skills.
Wouldn't hurt.
I did have a question, because when I was doing research for our interview, of course, when I already had the Writing Revolution, I would refer teachers to it. And then I do research and I saw the 2.0 and I was like, oh, so I ordered it, but I haven't really looked into seeing the difference. What is the difference between the original Writing Revolution and 2.0?
Well, the principles remain the same, and much of what is in there is essentially the same, but we tried to make it more user-friendly by providing more examples and sort of making things clearer and larger and putting red marks where this is not what not to do and that kind of thing. There's also slightly different sequence, the way the strategies are introduced. For example, we used to save transition words for the chapter on revision, but in fact, you can actually do a lot with transition words at the sentence level. So now that's in the part that's about sentence level activities. And then another, I think, relatively significant change is when it comes to writing multiple paragraph outlines, for multiple paragraph essays, we've introduced a new kind of outline. It used to be that you just went from a single paragraph outline to the multiple paragraph outline, which required students to come up with an introduction that had a general statement, a specific statement, and a thesis statement, and then reverse that order for the conclusion. And that's challenging for a lot of students to come up with those general and specific statements. Yeah. So the transition outline is when students are ready to move on to longer writing, but they're not really ready for that general specific thing, they can have an introductory paragraph that is just basically a thesis statement. It could be a couple of sentences, and this, again, summary, a conclusory statement that doesn't have to have that general specific thesis structure. So that's kind of a stepping stone to the multiple paragraph essay. Okay. But we've gotten very good feedback that teachers seem to find it more user friendly, this version.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, I have training coming up, and I'm going to bring 2.0 with me and refer my trainees out to that. It made me think, I joke around with my own children who are adults, but I have one that he would use it when he was kind of orally playing around with transition words, and I wrote it down. He would go A, and then he'd go second, and then last. And I'm like, okay, you understand transition words, but you're not exactly organizing it the correct way. It always kind of made me laugh when I thought about that.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you a little bit about those classes that are some of the hardest classes to write in. Social studies, history, science, at least for me. How can we instruct social studies, history, science teachers to instruct in writing?
Yeah, I think we have to make it clear that this is not just a way of teaching writing. It's a way of teaching, period. And it can be woven into instruction in any subject, any grade level. And so it's not just the province of reading teachers or ELA teachers. You can use that same because, but. So in a math class, you could say fractions are like decimals because fractions are like decimals, but fractions are like decimals. So, and math teachers might, and I know that this has sometimes happened, well, I'm not a writing teacher. I don't want to take time away from my math instruction to teach writing. But once they try it, they are often discover that instead of taking away from their math instruction, it actually makes their math instruction more powerful because it really gets kids grappling with the concepts. And that's true in any subject. It could be PE, Spanish, certainly social studies. There's Judy Hockman has told me she thinks social studies is actually the best context in which to use the writing revolution activities. There's room for practicing argumentative essays and all sorts of things that come up in social studies that really lend themselves to writing instruction.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I can see how that can actually help with comprehending those tough objectives that they may be studying.
I struggle in math, and I've been very vocal about that throughout this whole podcast. And I think that would help me tremendously because I am more language-based. I really do think that would help me learn those concepts a lot better.
Yeah. No, me too. I was always, math was not my strong point. And I think it would have been very helpful to have to put these things into my own words. I mean, that is very powerful, not just retrieving information. I mean, you can use a multiple choice quiz for retrieval practice, but when you actually put things into your own words, you have to process them. And that's what leads to understanding and retention of information.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's
I
awesome.
love it. Thank you.
So we're getting towards the end of our interview, but one of the things we traditionally do is we have our guest speakers talk about some of your favorite books or authors or websites or articles, because our listeners love to hear who inspires you and what you're reading.
Sure. So one of the, he was a character, so to speak, in my book, but one of the cognitive scientists who has written in a very accessible way about reading and cognitive science in general is Dan Willingham, who's a professor at University of Virginia. And he's written a number of books. I mean, I think they're all worth reading. Specifically, maybe if you're interested in reading, he's got one called The Reading Mind that I would recommend, but really any of them I think will be illuminating and interesting. And then sort of going farther afield, more to the realm of learning in general and cognitive science, there's an educator in England named Daisy Christodoulou, who has written several books. The one that I read first that I think is a great introduction to the way cognitive science applies to learning is called 7 Myths About Education. And then something that's maybe more practical for teachers in terms of like applying these principles is a book by Barbara Oakley and a couple of her other people called Uncommon Sense Teaching, which I think does a very clear job of explaining why explicit instruction can be so helpful. Everybody learns in essentially the same way, but some people, are going to have greater working memory capacity or greater prior knowledge. But there are lots of ways to sort of level the playing field. And I think that book does a great job of explaining that. So those are some that I would recommend.
Awesome. Thank you.
And if you could grant one wish for our students in the education system, what would it be and why?
One wish, I guess the broad thing would be that we stop thinking of reading as separate from writing and literacy in general as separate from the content areas. We have to start seeing that these things are all connected and spend more time on those content areas, especially in the elementary grades.
I totally agree.
I'm going to get on to the writing instruction. Chop, chop.
You're funny. Well, we thank you so much for coming on our podcast, and we appreciate your time on a Sunday.
Yes, it was so informative. My hand hurts from writing so much.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to reach your listeners. And this was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Melissa.
And Amy, and we're the
Dyslexia Duo.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth.
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
Family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.